Have you ever wondered what it meant for something or someone to be clean or unclean in the Old Testament law? You might assume it's about health or hygiene, but in the Bible it's something much deeper and symbolic. Today, we're diving into the Old Testament to understand what ritual purity really meant for the Israelites and why it mattered so much in their daily lives. When God gave his laws to Moses, he wasn't just giving a list of rules. Many of these laws, especially in Leviticus chapters 11 through 16, deal with ritual purity, a ceremonial way of living that honored God's holiness. God's presence was dwelling among the Israelites in the tabernacle. The purity laws helped the people respect that presence and reinforce the idea that God was holy. Holy doesn't just mean righteous or pure, it means set apart from what is common. God isn't one of the people, he isn't one of the pagan gods of the nations, one of the angels, or part of creation. He is set apart from everything else, and he set his people apart from the surrounding nations. Israel needed laws to reinforce this concept because they often treated the Lord like a common pagan god, or they approached him casually. Leviticus 11 says, "For I am the Lord who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy." Everything in these laws reminded Israel that God is distinct, and his people were called to be set apart too. This is why God included ritual cleanness in their law system. So what is ritual cleanness? Ritual cleanness, also called ceremonial cleanness, is a way of perceiving and categorizing people, places, and things based on symbolic purity rather than literal hygiene or health. This isn't a familiar concept in modern Western culture, but it existed in the ancient world, so the Israelites were already familiar with it. God used this concept to teach Israel about his holiness and have them live it out daily. God categorized everything as unclean, clean, or holy. These were symbolic states, not indicators of actual physical health. Terms like clean, washing, purify, and defilement weren't about literal germs or dirt, but about a ceremonial status. An important point to know is, being unclean did not necessarily mean you had sinned. Many legitimate activities caused ritual uncleanness. Uncleanness was primarily spread through physical contact. Touching an unclean person or object made you unclean, even unknowingly. There were laws governing movement between these three states. Rituals were required to move from unclean back to clean, or from clean to set apart as holy. These rituals included separation, animal sacrifice, ceremonial washing, sprinkling with water, blood, or oil, waiting a prescribed amount of time, and sometimes physical actions like shaving. The priests were responsible for teaching these laws and holding the people accountable. In Leviticus 10, God tells Aaron, "You are to distinguish between the holy and the common, and between the unclean and the clean, and you are to teach the people of Israel all the statutes that the Lord has spoken to them by Moses." And in Leviticus 15, God says, "Thus you shall keep the people of Israel separate from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle that is in their midst." This is the key to these laws. God's presence was in the middle of their camp, in the tabernacle. If you were ritually unclean, you did not approach his presence there. Seclusion in your tent or separation from the camp were sometimes required. Again, being unclean did not necessarily imply sin. People became unclean for many normal reasons. Distancing yourself from the tabernacle wasn't usually a punishment. It was a symbolic act to honor God's holy presence. Everyone would experience uncleanness at some point, So there was a constant flow of people moving between states, sometimes going outside the camp, all of it reinforcing respect for God's set-apart nature. There were 4 primary sources of ritual impurity. While the Bible doesn't always explain why God chose these categories, there are some likely explanations. Number 1, dead bodies. Touching a dead body, human or animal, made a person unclean. While Scripture doesn't directly explain why, it's likely because death is the opposite of God, who is the giver of life. So he decided this would be a source of uncleanness under his law. Number 2, leprosy, or more accurately, skin conditions. What the Bible calls leprosy refers to a range of skin conditions, not modern leprosy that's also called Hansen's disease today. These skin conditions were temporary, and they allowed restoration to cleanness once the skin conditions healed. Why were these ailments a source of uncleanness, but other ailments or diseases weren't? Perhaps it's because the skin acts as a barrier to your body. So these skin conditions may have symbolized a breakdown of a barrier, paralleling the barriers around God's holy presence at the tabernacle. Number 3, sexual functions. Situations like menstruation, childbirth, nocturnal fluid loss, certain sexual diseases, and sexual intercourse all caused ritual uncleanness. Scripture doesn't directly explain why, but all of these involve bodily fluid leaving the barriers of your body. So keeping distance from the tabernacle may have been a way to symbolize the concept of respecting God's holy barriers. These laws would have also distinguished Israel from pagan worship practices. The other nations often participated in sexual rituals at the temples of their gods. Even though the Lord created the sexual relationship between husband and wife as a good thing, he may have intentionally put a barrier between it and the tabernacle to help prevent the Israelites from adopting pagan thinking regarding the worship of the Lord. Number 4, certain animals. God categorized animals as clean or unclean. Unclean animals could not be eaten, while clean animals could be eaten. Leviticus 20 explains the purpose of these laws. God said, "I am the Lord your God, who has separated you from the peoples. You shall therefore separate the clean beast from the unclean, and the unclean bird from the clean. You shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have separated you from the people, that you should be mine." By separating only the clean animals for their food, the Israelites were symbolically acting out the concept that God had separated them from the other nations. It may sound alarming to imply that the other nations were unclean, but this wasn't about genetics or race. God strongly disapproved of the sinful practices occurring among the nations. Israel wasn't morally superior to them inherently, but God had separated them from the other nations to serve his purposes and imitate his holiness. God's laws commanded that the Israelites be kind to foreigners and help them. And any foreigner who wanted to join the Israelite nation and be part of God's covenant people was always welcome. By observing all these laws regarding clean, unclean, and holy, Israel's daily life became a living parable of God's holiness. Understanding ritual purity is still highly relevant today. It shows how seriously God regards holiness, and much of the Bible becomes difficult if we don't understand this concept. As we read on into the Old Testament, we see that the prophets used this ritual purity imagery to teach Israel lessons about moral purity. The New Testament shows how these laws were twisted and misused by Jewish leaders, something Jesus points out to them. Certain moments in the New Testament require an understanding of these ritual purity laws, such as Peter's vision of animals, which reveal that the Gentiles were being welcomed into God's kingdom through Christ. And many of the New Testament letters borrow this ritual purity imagery to show that it was all meant to teach and point to holiness and salvation in Jesus. So when you read clean or unclean in Leviticus or the rest of the Old Testament, remember, it was fundamentally about honoring God's holy presence and living a life set apart for Him. If you've enjoyed this video and want to study more, consider taking the full course on Udemy. Old Testament texts you've overlooked until now, exploring neglected passages in Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus. This is a brand new course, and in it we explore the genealogies in Genesis, the tabernacle details in Exodus, and the ritual purity laws in Leviticus. We show how these sections that seem unnecessary today are actually very profitable for all of us. If you want the full course with teacher and student materials for a church or homeschool group, see the Classful link. This is a new YouTube channel, so like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video and want us to create more content answering other Bible questions. Thank you for listening, and hopefully this has helped all of us elevate our Bible study.